Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's journey through time via the media, 1975 through 1984. So what does that mean? So basically, I've been thinking a lot, like the past year or so, like imagining a scenario, like if I could time travel anywhere, where would I want to go? And I always come up with the late 70s, early 80s. Like, I just have this feeling of wanting to experience, like, what it's like and what it was like to be an adult. Like, not so much the 60s or 50s or 40s, I couldn't care less. But for some reason, I kind of latched on to the late 70s and the early 80s, which is around the time I was born. So it would have been shortly before I was born and when I was a little kid, infant. I wanted to know what that culture was like for an adult, like what it's like to be an adult living in that era. And unfortunately, I don't have a time machine. I don't know anyone who could lend me one. So the best I could do is experience what it's like through the media, through movies, TV shows, music, specifically. So I decided to do this thing where for 10 days, I'll take each day listening to the music, watching the movies, and watching the TV shows of a specific year for that day. So I'm going to start with 1975 and go every year in order until 1984. So each day I'll do a different year. Start with 75, then 76, and onward, and on forth until I get to 84. I'll watch one movie each day. Yeah, each day I watch one movie from the year, 4 TV shows, or episodes of TV shows. So 4 episodes from 4 different TV shows, and listen to 4, 5, maybe 6 albums, depending on what I can fit in, all of that specific year. So each day I'll do a different year. And I know that doesn't give you a very wide scope, like only one movie, but still, so my criteria for choosing movies or shows to watch. So movies, my criteria is it has to be a movie I haven't seen before. There is one exception to this, which I'll get to later. But so mostly it's movies I haven't seen, so I can sort of experience for the first, because there's actually plenty of movies during this time period I haven't seen, particularly late 70s, early 80s. Like once I got up to 84, I started seeing way more movies I recognized. It's like, so the further you get, the more I've seen, because I remember like growing up in the 80s, there used to be a lot of like 60s, 70s stuff on TV. And in the 90s, I used to go to Blockbuster and rent videos, and sometimes they were from movies from the 80s or whatnot. No, there's plenty of movies. So I picked one, only one movie, because I had to do it all in one day. But I picked 4. So the movies, it's a movie I haven't seen that I'm interested in. It looks pretty good. Another criteria. I'm just not going to watch any crap. Or sometimes they don't look good, but sometimes it looks interesting, like I'm curious about it, and sort of to get the feel of that year. And then TV shows, ones that I'm not familiar with. Most of the shows from this era, even if I've seen them, I don't remember them very clearly. So, and it could be ones I have seen, maybe, or maybe I just heard of them and haven't seen them. So pick 4 of them. And music, I'm a bit more specific. So I'm mostly doing punk rock. Sometimes I go outside of that, more alternative, or sometimes I do slip into pop every once in a while. But I'm avoiding music that I'm familiar with, because there's tons of songs from the era and bands from that era that I have heard repeatedly that I'm super familiar with. Billy Joel, Elton John, Queen, Pink Floyd, like all that stuff I hear all the time. I'm trying specifically to pick bands that either I've heard of but never really listened to, or maybe I heard their later stuff but never realized they had this earlier stuff. And because this is kind of what inspired me to do this whole thing. I wanted to do this just for myself, but I thought, I might as well make a video out of it if I'm doing it. But what inspired me is because I watched the movie The Runaways, and that, about the band from the 70s, and it had all this music in that I was like just not familiar with, and it made me realize there's so much like punk and punk adjacent music around that time that's well known that I'm just discovering. Like, I just discovered for the first time within the past 6 years. There's all, the place I worked with used to play all this stuff from they played this one song from the 70s that I thought was modern, and then I looked it up. I was like, no, it's from the 70s, and there was tons of this other music, like Iggy Pop. I've heard of him, I know who he is, but I wasn't familiar with all this music that he put out before in the 70s. So there's this whole punk scene of the late 70s, early 80s that I'm just not familiar with. And it's funny because I'm very familiar with the alternative rock movement in the 90s, and a lot of that is based off of the punk movement in the 70s. Some of the bands like Iggy Pop and other bands were still around, so I listened. And Susie and the Banshees, I just knew them as a 90s alternative band. I didn't realize they'd been around since the late 70s. So, well, I think I knew that intellectually, but I never really heard any of that stuff. And so, also, there's all these songs that Nirvana and other bands covered that I didn't realize were actually... Well, I did realize it intellectually, but never heard, the original versions, this whole scene that inspired all those bands from the 90s. So, yeah, music, I'm mostly sticking with punk rock adjacent and that sort of thing, because that's what that's a genre I like, but I'm less familiar with, is all these music. Mostly, even if I go outside of the genre, it's mostly music I'm unfamiliar with or haven't heard. I'm avoiding stuff that I'm super familiar with. I'm not going to listen to Queen or Pink Floyd because I've listened to their albums tons of times. So yeah, that's what I'll do. And each day, at the end, or the next day once I'm done, I'll report back here, give a brief synopsis on what I watched, listened to, what I think about it. Alright, so day 1, 1975, I watched the movie A Boy and His Dog. TV shows, I watched an episode from Welcome Back, Cotter, Starsky and Hutch, Space 1999, and The Great Grape Ape Show. Music I listened to: Young Americans by David Bowie, Horses by Patti Smith, Go Girl Crazy by The Dictators, Fandango by ZZ Top, and Hair of the Dog by Nazareth. So starting with the movie A Boy and His Dog, it's a post-apocalyptic sort of hellscape movie, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, I bet you this was the inspiration for Mad Max, and sure enough it was. I looked it up, and apparently it was also the inspiration for Fallout, because it had these people living underground in these weird vault systems, so it inspired that as well. I remember hearing about this movie, the title sounds familiar, but I never knew what it was about, never saw it. I didn't care for it. Harlan Ellison wrote this short story that this was based off of, and he said that his short story was not so anti-woman like the movie was, and I agree that the movie was anti-woman. It doesn't particularly age well. It's got that 70s sort of disturbing feel, because I've seen other cult movies from the 70s that have this disturbing feel. I thought that I hated the ending. I thought it was kind of disgusting, and they kind of played it for laughs, whereas Harlan Ellison said his short story made it more of a tragedy, which would make sense. But overall, that movie, and it was mostly boring too, and the whole concept about this guy having you could speak telepathically to his dog, I thought was a bit ridiculous. So anyway, I didn't care for that. So getting into TV shows, welcome back, Cotter. I feel like I'm going to watch a lot of these sitcoms that remind me of early 80s sitcoms. Now, I've never seen this show before. I just heard of it because I knew John Travolta was in it. And it was okay for that. I mean, the premise in the episode I watched was silly. It's about them protesting, serving liver in the cafeteria or whatever, and they're having a sit-in. But I kind of liked the characters, so yeah, it wasn't the worst thing ever. Starsky and Hutch, never seen the show before, of course heard of it, and the whole time I was watching the episode, I kept thinking that song of the Beastie Boys, Sabotage, just kept playing in my head over and over again, because if you ever seen the music video for that, they were sort of mocking the 70s cop shows, and it was like almost exactly verbatim, like they kept singing this show. And also the Naked Gun kept going in my head, because a lot of the parodies they did off of that reminded me of this show. But it was just... And as you can see, it's the origin of these buddy cop shows or buddy cop movies of the 80s, and it was just ridiculous, that especially the part where they like hustled these people by playing basketball. They're just so awesome at everything. It was silly. And then Space 1999. I was actually really impressed with this show. It kind of reminded me of Star Trek The Motion Picture, like the aesthetics, the costumes, and the set design. So it makes me feel like this was what Star Trek kind of would have been like if it was ever made in the 70s. But I know it's an animated series, but that doesn't fucking count. But anyway, the thing that was distracting me the whole time, though, is that it's set in 1999, yet it's depicting this future where they have all this space-age technology, can fly to the other side of the solar system. And that was 25 years ago. Yeah, and The Boy and His Dog was set in 2024 as well. That was a little distracting, but this is worse. This is like 1990. This is like 25 years ago. But I could see, I would want to watch more of this show. Like, I've heard some people talk about it recently and say, oh, have you ever seen this? I was like, no, I absolutely haven't. It might be interesting to watch. This might be one of the shows I go back and watch more episodes of. I picked the highest rated episode in IMDb, and I didn't think it was all that great, so if this is the top, then the show can't get much better, but it was still kind of interesting, particularly from the aesthetics version. Like, it had these cheesy, like, monster, like, it reminded me of original series special effects, but I don't know, it seems somewhat a bit more advanced than the original series. Might not mind watching that. The Great Grape Ape Show was a ridiculous cartoon, and I guess I used to watch stuff like this when I was a little kid. Right now I'm not that familiar with 70s cartoons, so it's interesting going back and watching it, but it's like this giant ape was sitting in the boat, and I'm thinking the whole time, like, why isn't that boat singing? And then he could take the sun and pull it out of the sky. I don't know. It's a cartoon. Anyway, music I listened to. Young Americans by David Bowie. I have heard that's the song, the title song, recently. I wasn't aware of that when I picked the album to listen to. I've heard it several times recently. But a lot of this album, see, I'm not that familiar with David Bowie, especially his earlier stuff. So that's why I wanted to listen to it. But a lot of this album is very saxophone heavy, so it always reminds me of like 80s sitcoms, because they use all those saxophones during the transitions, and so it's I didn't care all that much for it. Didn't hate it though. Horses by Patti Smith. Patti Smith was really interesting. Again, I've heard of her name a lot, but never really listened to her music all that much. Yeah, it's kind of the soft sort of early, they say it punk, but it didn't really sound punkish at all to me, at least this album. But it was kind of unique. It had that sort of 60s, 70s feel to it, though, but I liked it. I could dig it. Go Girl Crazy by the Dictators. Now, the Dictators, this did seem like early punk to me. And the Dictators I've never heard of until fairly recently. And so, yeah, it felt like classic punk or classic rock kind of thing, so I was really into it. Fandango by ZZ Top was classic blues. When I think of ZZ Top, I think of Sharp Dressed Man and all this stuff in the 80s, which is kind of bluesy, but this album was like flat out like classic, what you think of classic blues. Which is not really my style, but I was into it. Like, it was good. And Hair of the Dog by Nazareth was, what I think of when I think of classic rock, 70s classic rock. Although I must admit, the song I recognized, Don't Go Messing with the Son of a Bitch. Like, I thought that song was in the late 70s or early 80s. I didn't realize it was back to 75, and there's a couple other songs I recognize. I was, hey, I didn't know it was them that sung that, but yeah, I was into that. That was pretty good classic rock. So anyway, that is 1975. So day 2, 1976. The movie I watched was The Man Who Fell to Earth. TV shows was Bionic Woman, Laverne and Shirley, and Charlie's Angels. Music was Ramones' self-titled album, Blondie's self-titled album, The Runaways' self-titled album, and So It Goes by Nick Lowe. So The Man Who Fell to Earth, I've heard of this movie. I knew it was a David Bowie movie. I think I've always avoided it because it seemed like, I think I heard it was kind of boring and weird, and I watched it, and guess what? It was kind of boring and weird. It was definitely very, like, artsy. You could tell that they're being like, ooh, look at how artsy. Ooh, this is so artsy. And they went overboard with the gratuitous sex. Like, they had this one character who just kept showing scenes with him having sex with 18-year-old girls, and it had nothing to do with anything, and that character barely appeared in the movie, so it was just like a waste of time. And I don't know, and all the sex scenes are supposed to be all artistic, you could tell, but it's just, yeah, it did seem very pretentious, and it seemed like the story could have been reduced to a 40-minute episode of television, and I didn't get it. Like, as soon as I watched it, I had to watch all these YouTube videos that explain what happened, because I was like, I didn't understand, mainly because there's a plot twist that happens halfway through the film that they kind of just gloss over. Like, they throw in this character who's the dude who played Benjamin Sisko's friend in that episode of The Maquis, and that actor is there, and he just pops up for a couple scenes, and they show him like in the future with his family. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? But apparently he was like some sort of government agent that like overthrew David Bowie's character, who was like this huge rich corporation guy, and arrested him to do experiments because he's an alien, of course. But that happened, that whole twist, and I still don't understand if this other character, who the dude who was having gratuitous sex, if he was the one that betrayed David Bowie. Like, they don't make that clear. Like, it's not very clear. It's just more interested in having long drawn out artistic sex scenes and weird shit happening. Like, it's just watching 10 TVs at the same time or whatever. And I think the main plot about him like trying to get water for his home planet, but then becoming an alcoholic and failing in his mission, and his ship is destroyed, and he ends up just wallowing in his misery. Like, that's kind of an interesting concept, but it's just the way it was executed. It's not my thing. So it wasn't really my thing. TV shows, I watched Bionic Woman, which I actually liked, surprisingly enough. I wouldn't mind watching more of it. I saw in the credits producer Harv Bennett, and I was like, hey, that's the guy who produced the Star Trek movies. But I think I heard that before that he did Bionic Woman. The episode I watched was actually really cheesy, with Vincent Price is in it, and it had to do with like these rich people, rich guy who died, and they're all trying to get his money. They're doing a scavenger hunt to see who gets all the entire inheritance. That seems very 80s like to me. It reminds me of a lot of 80s stuff. But and then the cheesiness of the way she went bong, kind of like that. Anyway, other show, Laverne and Shirley, again sitcom-ish. Very sitcom-ish, kind of cheesy. It's about them meeting this bully and going on a date with this bully who bullies them, and these other women show up and they get in a fight. And it made me think that 70s and 80s like shows always were obsessed with like fights and bullies and people, and they don't really do that much of it in modern culture. And it made me think, like, did people just fight all the time because it didn't have the internet or video games at this stage, and so they were just bored and had nothing to do but fight? But no, it also made me think that the show was kind of a precursor to stuff like Seinfeld and Friends that would come later. I've never seen this show before. I've heard of it, of course. I've seen it parodied, like the whole opening thing when they're in the factory or whatever. But yeah, it just felt very 70s-ish to me. Yeah, it's in the 70s. So Charlie's Angels, kind of like this one a bit better. It was okay. Like, it was different than I thought it would be. I thought it would just be like these women like fighting people the whole time, but they were really going on this undercover mission and doing this scam. It also had to do with an inheritance. It had to do with this rich person dying and people fighting over his inheritance. So I was right. They do the storyline over and over again. It just so happened that 2 episodes I picked from 76 were both at the same thing. I wouldn't mind watching more episodes of this, and I'm kind of curious to see the remakes or the movies, reboot movies, which I've never seen. But yeah, it wasn't as cheesy as I thought. I'll be fair. Oh yeah, and Tommy Lee Jones and Dr. Pulaski, Diana Muldaur, were also in this episode of Charlie's Angels. I was like, hey, there's them. It was so weird seeing Tommy Lee Jones, especially being young, and he played kind of a minor character. But anyway, that that was interesting too. So music, Ramones self-titled album. There's a lot more songs in this I recognized than I thought I would. There was a sweet little girl, wanna be your boyfriend, and and a couple others like, hey, oh, let's go. So I'm starting to appreciate the Ramones a bit more. I saw them in concert at a festival in the 90s, and I didn't care for them. It just felt like every song was the same. They'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, and they'd do the same song every time. But that's when, I was like 15. Listening to it now with a more discerning ear, I can see that definitely that it influenced a lot of music that came after it, but I think the music that came after it did better. Sorry. Anyway, but it was still interesting. It's still good. I was into it. Blondie, I did not care for this at all. I like some of the Blondie stuff that I've heard of, like the radio stuff from the 80s, but this was just like, sounded like 50s pop, like 50s music, and it was just like all bland and poppy. I couldn't listen to the whole album. I was like, no, I didn't care for that one. The Runaways, I did really care for. I love this album. I thought it was really good. And of course, they kind of inspired me to do this whole thing because I saw the movie about them, and I have been listening to some of their songs recently. Of course, Cherry Bomb, very popular. So I'm really into them. I can see how they could heavily influence a lot of the music I listen to now, especially the female-driven punk bands and rock bands. And yeah, this can't believe this came out in 76. I loved it. And so it goes. Nick Lowe. Never heard of Nick Lowe. I just picked him at random, kind of. And it reminded me more of 60s music, kind of like, the Beatles scene, but nowhere near as good as the Beatles. And so it felt more 60s and 70s, and it just felt generic, like it was fine. But anyway, that is 1976. So, day 3, 1977, the year that Star Wars came out, although, of course, I didn't watch that. What I watched was, movie I watched was Shadow of Chikira. TV shows I watched was Space Sentinels, The Professionals, Soap, 8 is Enough. Music I listened to was Lust for Life by Iggy Pop, My Aim is True by Elvis Costello, Suicide self-titled album, Motorhead self-titled album, and Queens of Noise by The Runaways. So, starting with the movie Shadow of Chikira, which I looked up and apparently has a ridiculous amount of names. It's known by the Shadow of Chikira, Demon Mountain, The Ballad of Virgil Caine, Thundarr Mountain, The Wishbone Cutter, and the Curse of Demon Mountain. And when I went to watch it, like it had a different name, and then I turned it on, and then it had yet another name. I was like, well, I don't understand. Anyway, it's this like 70s horror film. It reminds me of those horror western. It reminds me, it's like the slow burn western horror. I mean, kind of like, in the vein of Shining or something like that. It reminds me of a lot of these movies that I used to be on syndication when I was flipping through the channels in the 80s or early 90s. It's something that would be on before Star Trek came on. I was just waiting for to be over. It's just bland. I watched it because I heard it was like the inspiration of Predator, so I thought maybe it would be just like it, but it actually was barely like it at all. There was barely any resemblance. As a group of soldiers go into the mountain looking for these diamonds, and they come across this curse that is trying to kill them, and they pick up this woman who's injured, but it turns out the big twist ending is that she was part of the curse, and she ends up killing them. I am thankful that they didn't go to the gold fever route, because when they got the diamonds, I'm like, are they going to do bullshit gold fever thing? I'm so sick of it. But they didn't do that. Instead, they did the bullshit Native American curse, which wasn't much better. So, yeah, not the best movie in the world, but, it was fine. It was in very poor quality. The other two movies I watched were, like, remastered and very good quality. This was, like, shitty-ass terrible quality, but anyway. So the TV shows I watch is Space Sentinels, The Professionals, Soap, and 8 is Enough. So Space Sentinels was a cartoon done by whatever that same company that did Star Trek the Animated Series. You could tell, and it had all these annoying background noises, and it was cheesy. It is Hercules and 2 other people were in a spaceship traveling the cosmos. Hercules looked like He-Man for some reason. I know this was before He-Man, but still. And it was so cheesy to come across as energy being is sucking the energy out of them. They're like, please don't suck our energy. We need it to live. And they're like, okay. And I don't know. It was like the Star Trek the Animated Series, but much cheesier. Then there was The Professionals, which I've never heard of this show before in my life, probably because it's a British show. To me, it came across as a cross between Starsky and Hutch and James Bond, and it was kind of goofy. It was interesting. Like, it was about the episode I watched about this assassin trying to assassinate this ambassador or whatever with this huge sniper rifle, and the good guys end up getting him. At one point, I was actually rooting for the bad guys because the good guys are kind of assholes. It ends with them being like peeping Toms and making a joke out of it with their police chief. But anyway, then Soap, which I have seen this show before. It's been a while. I don't remember it all, but I do remember some things came back to me. I was watching it because I used to watch it, I think, regularly when I was much younger, when it was in syndication. After it finished, of course. But I think my siblings really liked it. And it was funny, actually. This is one of the shows that really hold up. It was much funnier than like these other crappy sitcoms that I've been watching so far. And I had that thing that I remember them saying at the start when they recapped the last episode, like, confused? Oh, well, you won't be for long, and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it was all right. I think this one really holds up. 8 is Enough was boring as hell. I never seen the show before. I heard the title, so it rang the bell. I heard it talked about before, but I thought it was like going to be another cheesy sitcom, but instead it was like a Brady Bunch type hour-long drama with a laugh track, and it was so boring. It's like after-school special. It's like, oh, gee, Tommy, and like this silly, cheesy, like lame jokes. But this episode had the main character dating this woman who only appeared in this one episode, and I was like, every time I saw her, I was like, she looks so familiar. She looks so familiar. Who is she? I know who she is. And I was like, she looks kind of like Captain Garrett, but it can't be because this is way too early for that. But then at the end, the credits said Trisha O'Neill. And I was like, holy shit, it is Captain Garrett. Like, I didn't think she would be young enough, and she looks older in this episode and doesn't look that old in yesterday's Enterprise. So I don't know. But anyway, music I listened to, Lust for Life by Iggy Pop. Of course, I know that song from the 90s, Trainspotting soundtrack, and then there was the other one, Passenger, which I only heard recently in the past 5 years. Both songs I thought were kind of from the 90s. I didn't realize they were from the 70s. And yeah, but Iggy Pop is okay. It's kind of, punk, early punk, sort of funky sort of thing. It was alright. Then there was My Aim is True by Elvis Costello. Not a huge Elvis Costello fan. Again, I didn't hear a lot of his stuff until recently, within the past 5 years. And that song, the Watching the Detectives, I thought just came out. I didn't know it was from the 70s. Because the radio station and my work and all these other places were playing it so much. I was like, it must be a recent song. And then there's the other song, Allison, which I think is kind of boring and I didn't really care for it. So yeah, this album was not really my style. It's just a bit too boring, slow paced. Maybe I'm not a huge Elvis Costello fan. Suicide, self-titled album. I'd never heard of this band in my life, but I loved it. I thought it was really good. It reminded me a lot of the music that it would play when I go to concerts, and it'd be in between sets and you're standing around and you're playing some music you can barely hear because everyone's talking. I'm sure I've heard this album before there. But it was interesting because it seemed to have a mix of like the organ music, sort of like the Doors and stuff that you would hear a lot in the 60s and 70s, but mixed with like electronica and a bit of early punk. It was, a very unique sound. I didn't think it was like maybe the best thing ever, but it definitely grabbed my attention. Apparently, there's a lot of bands that cited that they were influenced by this band, which is very interesting. Like U2, Radiohead, Depeche Mode, New Order. I could definitely see the New Order thing. And there's other bands that apparently other people attribute them as being inspirations for, like Nine Inch Nails, Devo, and Sonic Youth, and the Cars. So never heard of this band before, and apparently they continued to be around up until like 2016 when the dude passed away. And I was like, I just never heard of them. That's very interesting. It was definitely a new discovery for me. Motorhead, self-titled. So Motorhead, I heard of them, maybe first started in the early 2000s. I thought of them more as like an obscure indie thing, but they seem to be a bit more well-known in this. When I was listening to the album, I was like, it sounds like that Ace of Spades song. So I guess they took inspiration from this band. But then I looked it up, and that Ace of Spades song was by Motorhead. I was like, oh, shit. I thought it was by, like, Iron Maiden or Slayer or something like that. So this band does sound, kind of had that heavy metal sound, kind of like those bands, but mixed in with a bit like early punk or whatever. So not really my thing, but not an unpleasant listen. Then there's Queens of Noise by the Runaways. Again, second time listening to the Runaways. I love the Runaways, as I said before, but this album seemed a bit more rock opera-ish than the other album. Seemed more like classic rock, early punk. This seemed more have like more of a rock opera, kind of like Queen or Led Zeppelin kind of influences, and I like it. Like, maybe not as much as the last album, but it was still really good. They had this one song called Hollywood, which I've heard before, which I love. I think is a great song. So yeah, overall, great listen. So that's 1977. So, 1978, day 4. Movies I watched was Jubilee. TV shows I watched was Taxi, Mork and Mindy, Battlestar Galactica, Fantasy Island. Music I listened to was Love Bites by the Buzzcocks. The Scream by Susie and the Banshees. The Image Has Cracked by Alternative TV. V2 by the Vibrators. Blood Brothers by the Dictators. So starting with the movie Jubilee, I've never heard of this movie before. Apparently it's well known as the punk rock movie, which is why I picked it up. But apparently there was a bit of controversy. Some people in the punk scene didn't like the movie and didn't think it represented punk in the best way ever, and I can actually agree with that, because it did seem to, it portrayed like the nihilistic sort of apathetic vibe that punk has, and it reminded me a lot of my friend that I knew in the 90s who had that same sort of vibe. It was more of a grunge thing then, but it was that same sort of punk attitude. I'm surprised he didn't make me watch this movie, actually. He had that sort of apathetic, don't give a shit and just want to fuck shit up kind of attitude. So I got that, and I think he got that vibe right. But then when it had them just like killing people at random, and apparently the movie's supposed to be some post-apocalyptic thing, but I didn't really get that. I wasn't sure if it was post-apocalyptic or not, and it was just flat out weird. It didn't have a plot, didn't have a story. It was just a bunch of scenes thrown together, people going around acting crazy, and I was bored with it. And and it was just trying to be artistic, obviously, and I thought it was kind of pretentious. And I did like the vibe, and I liked the music, but there was no story there. There's tried to do this bullshit thing with Queen Elizabeth from the 16th century, like traveling into the future, but that was just like every once in a while they show her just walking around, looking around. It wasn't clear. It was just goofy. Whenever they had her scenes, they just did all this poetry, Shakespearean language shit that was just boring. I didn't care for this movie that much. The TV shows, there was Taxi, which I remember watching when I was a little kid, and I didn't really care for the opening music. I always remember that when that opening music came on, I changed the channel because I thought it was dull. And I didn't think I liked it, and I thought I'd like it better because I've heard good things about it. It's where Christopher Lloyd and Danny DeVito got their starts, but I watched it, and I was like, it was too sitcom-ish for me. It wasn't really that fun. I could see that some of the characters were good, but it was just the goofiest, blandest sort of normal sitcom humor. Maybe it got better in later seasons, but yeah, didn't care for that. Mork and Mindy, I liked. I have seen this show before, but I was too young to remember. I don't remember it. But of course I know of it. I know the whole Nanu, and that's where Robin Williams got his start, and I know the premise of it. But I liked it because it was an interesting take of, an alien who doesnent understand like normal everyday things that humans do, and how he's like misunderstanding. He sleeps upside down and thinks that this moose head is a bread spread cover or whatever. It's like, and I thought that was interesting, but the plot of it was so dumb and goofy and very like 70s sitcom-ish. But I think the humor in Robin Williams sort of overcame that a little bit for me, so I appreciated it a bit more. Battlestar Galactica, yes, I remember my sister told me about this and said that it was horrible and nowhere near as good as the 2000s version, and I concur. After watching it, it was way more goofy, way more silly. It had this, like, the episode I watched had kind of a Seven Samurai plot, a little bit different, but it had these pig-like aliens, and all the main characters were goofy, and they had like this woman who was hitting on Adama and trying to get with him, and they played it for laughs. Maybe I watched a bad episode, but no, I didn't care for it. I would much prefer Space 1999. I much like that better. I would go back and watch that before I'd watch this. So Fantasy Island, I never seen this before. The only thing I know about it is Ricardo Montalban in it, and it has that one guy who goes, the plane, and that's all I knew. But I can gather from like the title and just the pictures that I've seen that is about people who come to this island, and Ricardo Montalban hosts them and lets them fill out their fantasies, kind of like Shore Leave, that episode from the original series. Sure enough, that's what it was, and it was so fucking goofy. I mean, I kind of knew that it would be, but it was so goofy. Like, the episode I watched was so it was about this woman who was in her 60s, and she wanted to be 25 again, and it was obvious that they got a young actor to play him, put him in old person makeup, and so when they became young, they just had him look normal. And then she fell in love with this dude who I thought was an asshole, and they had no chemistry. But anyway, but yeah, she fell in love with this dude, and she was worried because she would only be young for a couple of days, and she was like, oh, what, he's going to find out I'm old and it's going to ruin everything. But it turns out the big twist is that he's also old, and he took the same potion that she did, and they ended up getting married. It was so stupid. And then it had another plot with this dude who was like a World War One buff. He traveled back to World War One times. It was like, oh my god, they're trying to kill me. I was like, you're in a fucking war. Of course they're trying to kill you. That was kind of dumb. So it was all goofy. So music, Love Bites by the Buzzcocks. That was a very typical punk. There's one song I recognized that used to play at my work, and so it seemed a bit more commercial friendly punk actually, but yeah, it was kind of generic. And then there was The Scream by Susie and the Banshees. I like this album. I've heard Susie and the Banshees in the 90s. I first heard of her or the band during the early 90s when I first started getting into alternative music. I knew they'd been around, but I didn't know for this long. And apparently, like, this album I listened to my ears, it sounded like it could have came out in 1993. It didn't sound like a 70s album at all to me. It sounded just like alternative 90s, and that surprised me, and I really liked it. I thought it was really interesting, so I'd be willing to listen to more from them. The Image is Cracked by Alternative TV. I'd never heard of this band, and this one was more stereotypical punk. There was a couple songs in it I liked that I thought were unique, but it was like a typical punk album. And then V2 by the Vibrators, that was even more, that was the most blandest cliche punk album. It was just da-da-da, and so I didn't even make it all the way through that one. Blood Brothers by the Dictators. It had that one song Baby Let's Twist, which I got into a couple years ago and was listening to it a lot, so that was familiar. When I first heard that song, I thought it came out in 2020. I didn't know it was from the 70s. But the rest of the album sounded, kind of more generic punk, what you think of with classic punk, and it sounded very similar to the other albums. So other than that, it was okay, but it wasn't anything super unique. So anyway, that was 1978. And I don't even care to shake the zipper blues. And why am I singing that song? Because the name of that song is 1979, which is the year that I'm covering. It's also the year that Star Trek the Motion Picture came out, and just so happens to be the year that this person was born. So now all the stuff I'm watching, I was actually alive when it was released. So the movie I watched was Over the Edge. TV shows I watched: New Adventures of Flash Gordon, Mrs. Columbo, Three's Company, The Facts of Life. Music I listened to: Fear of Music by the Talking Heads, At the Chelsea Nightclub by the Members, London Calling by the Clash, Drums and Wires by XTC. So Over the Edge, originally I was going to watch this movie called The Warriors because I saw the trailer and this guy going, "Can you dig it?" And I never heard that before, maybe from The Simpsons, so I thought I'd watch that. But then I watched the rest of the trailer. I was like, no, this looks really stupid. So instead I watched this movie because it looked kind of like a precursor to Pump Up the Volume, which is one of my favorite teenage movies, and I think it was. I did really like it. It says, like, the thing I read said it inspired all these 80s John Hughes movies, but it didn't really have that cheesy feel to it that those movies. It had more of a dramatic feel, like Pump Up the Volume, so I think it was more like that. Anyway, so this movie apparently was inspired Richard Linklater to do Dazed and Confused. It was also one of Kurt Cobain's favorite movies, and he said they based the Smells Like Teen Spirit video off of the ending of this film when they're rioting, and I definitely saw the Dazed and Confused connection right away. It's very similar to that. I also think it's like that movie Kids that came out in the 90s, although not as crazy. But still, so I liked this movie. I thought it was a very good sort of a movie tackling teenage angst and about, parents neglecting the teenagers and blaming them for all this graffiti and vandalism and stuff. But the thing is that the film tells you exactly what the problem is in the text at the start of the film. It says, oh, a quarter of the population of this town is under the age of 15, yet they don't really have any recreation or anything for them to do, and so that's why they get up to all this vandalism. So they spell it out to you. So the whole movie, it's like obvious that there's a bowling alley, a movie theater. They were going to say to come to town. It's like, no, we're not going to bother with that. We need to have the freaking this industrial thing come to town because we need it's all about the real estate. They want to raise the prices of their house, and so they're neglecting the kids. But they make that like too obvious. And plus, I thought like the whole point is they would have the parents find out by the end of the movie, realize what they're doing, but they never do, which is frustrating. So instead, the kids just riot and like start blowing shit up and lock the parents into a school and shit, and then so they all get arrested and sent to juvie at the end. I'm like, that's a stupid ending, and it's cool. It's so too crazy, and it gets crazy and over the top. So I watched this review by Siskel and Ebert that was made when this first came out. Siskel didn't like it, but I always disagree with him. Ebert, I more agree with, and he actually said exactly what I was thinking, that it was a really good movie, great drama, great way to describe, teenage angst, but the ending was too over the top and ridiculous, and I agree with him 100%, but this is probably the favorite movie that I've watched for this thing that I'm doing so far. So TV shows, the new adventure of Flash Gordon made me appreciate Space Sentinels more and made that look good because it was so dumb. I didn't follow it. Like, I couldn't follow it. It didn't make any sense to me. I didn't know what was happening. Of course, it's Flash Gordon, so it has the whole evil thing, and that's what it's meant to do, but I just couldn't stop thinking of Captain Proton the whole time, and it was just dumb. And Mrs. Columbo stars Kate McGrew. Playing Mrs. Columbo, and it's so weird seeing Captain Janeway, and I didn't realize she was that old because she must have been in her 20s or 30s, and this was the year I was born. So, but anyway, that was weird. That show was just weird. The episode was about a ventriloquist who was murdering this dude, and apparently he was like schizophrenic or something because he heard the dummy talking or whatever, and it was just weird, and it was like she figured this out eventually, and it was just a slow burn too, but she didn't actually like do anything. She showed up and like revealed it and had a conversation with him, but she didn't get arrested. Just the episode just ended. I don't know, it was just bizarre. And I do wonder that she's Mrs. Columbo, and so Columbo's her husband, but she's like, oh, he's away in San Diego. So do they do that every episode? Like every single episode, he just takes all these business trips and we never see him? I don't know. It's just weird. The whole thing was just weird. And it was also weird seeing Captain Janeway in this role. Anyway, so Three's Company, I did hear about this. I saw it when I was a kid, but I was too young to understand all of the sexual references, so it was interesting watching this as an adult. It was played off, apparently it's known for playing off the, comedy of the misunderstanding, and they misunderstand and think this is actually happening, was really that happening. That happened in this episode, so I do wonder if every episode was like that. That being said, it was okay. I actually didn't mind it as much as some of these other sitcoms. It was kind of funny. The Facts of Life, I remember watching that as a kid, but again, I don't remember it. It was too young. And this was also interesting. This seemed a bit more typical sitcom-ish kind of jokes, but it was an interesting concept of, these girls at a girls' school and trying to get along with each other. So I thought it was okay. So the music I listened to, Fear of Music by Talking Heads. Of course, there's a couple songs I know very well on this album. The Find Your City, Find Yourself a City to Live in, and There Ain't No Party, This Ain't No Disco. Like, I know those songs, but it was interesting hearing the whole album because it definitely sounds like Talking Heads, but not what I think of the 80s Talking Heads. It has more disco in it, despite what he said about this ain't being no disco. It sounds more disco-like, but also a bit more punk punkish, punk rock mixes in there. So yeah, it did sound unique. So I did enjoy that. At the Chelsea nightclub by The Members. It's funny how it seems like all these punk bands are obsessed with names about penises. There's Sex Pistols, the Buzzcocks, and now The Members. They just have dicks on the mind. I don't know. But this was just a generic punk album. Another one that was just like, da-da-da. It's just very generic. Nothing to write home about. Couldn't even listen to the whole thing. London Calling by The Clash. Of course I know that song, and there's a couple other songs that I recognize instantly. And The Clash is, I always thought of them as an 80s new age band. When I first heard that they were punk, I was like, they're not punk. But listening to this earlier stuff, I can definitely see that they are punk. They did sound a little similar to the Ramones. Probably like them better. I think they're more unique, so I did enjoy this. Drums and Wires by XTC. It has this one song that I absolutely love, that I first got into when I saw the Bandersnatch Black Mirror movie, Making Plans for Nigel, and I listened to that song a lot, so I just love that song. The rest of the album was good too, not as good as that song, but it felt more like 80s new age than it did like 70s music. And it's interesting because I first heard of XTC in the 90s. I'd never heard of them before, and and they had this huge back catalog, and I never even heard of them. And they were pretty decent too. I spot some punkish as well, and they also sound, Talking Heads a bit like that. So I enjoyed that. So anyway, that was 1979. Alright, so next is 1980, the year The Empire Strikes Back came out. So the movie I watched was Bad Timing, TV shows, Magnum P.I., Different Strokes, Too Close for Comfort, Thundarr the Barbarian, music I listened to, Los Angeles by X, Wild Planet by the B-52s, Is This Real by the Wipers, Freedom of Choice by Devo. So, the movie Bad Timing, I've never heard of this movie before. Apparently it's got an X rating probably because the people who give out ratings just hated it and thought it was disturbing. The production company took their name off of it and said that it was a sick movie made by sick people for sick people to watch. And you know what? I don't think it's all that disturbing. It does have a scene that is somewhat disturbing at the end, but I've seen much worse. And plenty of R-rated, even some PG-rated stuff. I've seen more disturbing scenes, and and it wasn't pornographic at all. Again, the sex scenes I've seen much worse. Like Game of Thrones was way more sex and nudity than this was. But I just found it boring. Like, it was done totally out of sequence and out of order, which is usually something I like. But it was just, I couldn't even follow it. I had no idea what was going on other than there was these two people in a toxic relationship and they were just showing random shit out of order. And I wasn't, and they had a young Harvey Keitel playing a cop, and I thought he was, the scenes with him were a bit silly. But apparently this is one of Christopher Nolan's 10 favorite films, and it kind of makes sense because I could see this as a precursor because it's, out of chronological order, and it's about a protagonist who's kind of anti-hero and really fucked up in the head. You don't really root for him, and it's about toxic relationships. So that's Christopher Nolan stuff. That's like describing Memento. So I can see how they took this format and just improved upon it and made it better. And it's funny because I was reading all the reviews and people either hated it or loved it, that was a pretentious piece of shit or a great work of art. I didn't think either. I didn't think it was pretentious. I just thought it was boring because I actually liked some of the art and some of the themes that they were going for. I just didn't think they did a good job at making it interesting or a plot that you actually wanted to watch. So TV shows, Magnum P.I., cheesy as hell, very 80s, not as quite as cheesy as I thought it would be. I was actually into it for a little bit, but then it got a little silly towards the end. The interesting thing I think about this episode is I had these flashbacks to 1941, and it made me realize that the time difference between 1941 and when this show came out is less than the time difference between when that show came out and right now. It's crazy shit. Different Strokes. It's so cheesy, so fucking cheesy, such an unfunny cheesy sitcom, but that's what I expected. Like, every time Arnold opened his mouth, I just was like wanting him to shut up. He was definitely like a precursor to Steve Urkel. What you talking about, Willis? Of course, he had to say that every episode's catchphrase. It was stupid. But anyway, the episode was about Willis dating someone who turned out to be Janet Jackson, and the father was being kind of played by Janet Jackson. Apparently, I didn't know this until I looked it up. But the father was being a really dick, saying, "Oh, I don't want you to date her." It was just, why is he being such a dick? And at the end, it was like, you're right. You can see her in the weekends. Like, I don't know. It's so dumb. Too Close for Comfort. Absolutely hated this. It was so actively unfunny. It wasn't just cheesy and annoying. It was unfunny. It was terrible. But I thought this was really interesting because the whole point that I'm doing this thing is try to get a feel for the culture in 1980. And this was very helpful in that regard because I couldn't believe how normalized sexual harassment was, because the whole episode was about this person getting a job at the bank, and her sister was like, "Oh yeah, he's definitely going to try to date you constantly. He's going to want to sleep with you all the time. That's just him. That's just the way things are. Don't let the..." But she was saying he's a jerk, but still, that's just the way things are. And if you do sleep with him, he'll give you a promotion, apparently. And apparently he did that to a lot of other women, gave them promotions because they slept with them. And they were just, this is just normal, the way things are. I was like, I knew things were worse in 1980, but still, I was like, to see it like in a sitcom, in a primetime sitcom, just casually, he just sexually harass women like crazy. That's just the way things are. Fucking crazy. Thundarr the Barbarian, I was really impressed with this. Granted, it's a 80s cartoon for kids, and so it's very simplistic. But it's like I heard of the name. Like, it sounds vaguely familiar, but I'd never seen it, never really heard of it. And it's like a post-apocalyptic time when the world goes to shit in 1994, and then it takes place 2,000 years later when there's like wizards and flying dragons and shit and people, weird alien looking monster things running around. It was so interesting, but I could see that it was definitely copying from Star Wars because the main character had like a lightning sword, like a lightsaber, and his sidekick was like Chewbacca. It was like his furry monster, doesn't speak. He goes, "Arr!" But anyway, music, I listened to Los Angeles by X. This was kind of, again, more generic punk, although it did have a male and female vocalist together, so it was a little bit more unique than some of the stuff, but I wasn't too impressed with it. I realized I have heard of the band X before because they had the song come out in 1993 that was very like Gem Blossoms, very like of the 90s. I had no idea that they were a punk band that did like 6 or 7 albums in the 80s. It was pure punk. Very interesting to hear that. Wild Planet by the B-52s had a lot of B-52 songs I recognized, like My Own Private Idaho and a few others I can't remember the name of. They did sound like the B-52s, like the Love Shack and stuff I'm familiar with, but a bit more raw, so I could tell this is like an earlier sort of version. But that was kind of interesting. Is This Real by the Wipers? I never heard of the Wipers before, and there were 2 songs in here that I recognized because Nirvana covered them, Return of the Rat and D7. I do think Nirvana's versions are better, but I'm a bit biased in that regard. But I loved this album, actually. I was really interested. I could see this as like a sort of precursor to grunge, so it makes total sense to me that this would be a inspiration for Nirvana, and I think that it was very unique from all this generic punk that I've been listening to. Freedom of Choice by Diva, again, I love this. I recognize so many songs. Whip It, Freedom of Choice, The Girl I Want, and a few other songs. And it had another Nirvana cover, or a song that Nirvana covered, Turn Around. I think I heard that it was a Devo cover, but I kind of forgot about it. I never heard the original. But yeah, I had fun with this album. I thought it was unique and great. So yeah, that is 1980. Anyway, day 7, 1981. So this is the year Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, and it's probably my least favorite day so far for this video. The movie I watched was The Road Warrior, TV show Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, Danger Mouse, Hill Street Blues, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Music I listened to was Damaged by Black Flag, Fire of Love by the Gun Club, Talk 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 by the Psychedelic Furs, Bad Reputation by Joan Jett. So, Road Warrior, I kind of cheated a little bit with this because I technically have seen this movie before, but it was so long ago. It was when I was like in my early 20s, and I don't remember anything about it. Even watching it, I had nothing ring a bell. The only thing I remember is that I didn't like it. But I was curious to check it out again because I think my expectations back then were a bit different for it. I was expecting more of an epic movie, and it was actually a bit more localized. It's basically a Seven Samurai story. And I think that's just not what I was expecting at all, so I think I wrote it off as not a good movie. But watching it again, kind of knowing, especially after seeing Fury Road and other, movies in the 70s that have this same, kind of weird style, I kind of knew more what to expect, and so I wasn't caught off guard, and so I think I enjoyed it more. That being said, I think the more recent Mad Max movies are way better, especially Furiosa, which I do think is the best Mad Max movie. I'm sorry, I do. And yeah, it's basically the Seven Samurai plot, or the plot about a reluctant hero who does, I just want my money and go. It's like the cliche thing. But the world building they had with, the post-apocalyptic scape made it a little bit more interesting. But yeah. So TV shows, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I cheated again with this one because I've actually seen this really recently. I watched it just a couple of years ago. I've actually seen like 5 or 6 episodes of it, but this time I did watch an episode that I hadn't seen before. I vaguely remember this from watching it as a kid, but it was on from 81 to 83, so unless I watched it in 83 when I was 4 years old, I must have caught it on the reruns. However, I have memories of getting up Saturday mornings and watching new episodes, so maybe I remember watching it when I was 4 years old, but I thought I was older. But anyway, when I watched this recently for the first time, I was shocked at how cheesy it was, but kind of makes sense. But yeah, it had like Firestar, who's a character who was invented for this show, which surprised me. I learned that because I always knew her as being part of the Marvel Universe, but apparently they made her a comic book character after the show. And Iceman was one of the main characters as well, and he's an X-Men, so it was weird that he's hanging out with Spider-Man. The episode I watched had the Kingpin as the enemy, and it's so weird seeing that version of the Kingpin after currently watching Daredevil. With the much, much better Kingpin. This is, of course, 80s cartoon Kingpin. And Captain America was on it, too, as like they were brainwashing him to steal this weapon, but it's kind of things you would expect from an early 80s cartoon. Danger Mouse, I do remember that. I recognize the name, and I'm pretty sure I did watch this when I was a kid, but I again remembered nothing about it, and it turned out to be like this, James Bond-esque, maybe Get Smart, maybe a little like British spy thriller, and it had the narration, will this be the end for Danger Mouse? The thing I didn't get about this is the world building, because I thought they were anthropomorphized animals running around everywhere, but then the mice were actually the size of mice, and the buildings were way, way bigger. So it's just trying to say that they're actually just mice and there's humans running around. If so, it was confusing because it didn't actually show any humans. But I did like the kind of tongue-in-cheek way that they treated spy thrillers. Hill Street Blues, it's probably, I was trying to think what this is a precursor to, probably Homicide and NYPD Blue. I didn't look this up recently, but I think I remember hearing it was one of the first of its kind. It's a police procedure, but it's more serious, and it shows the whole station. It follows all these different cops and different storylines in every episode. And I think it's good at what it does, because this definitely does not have that cheese that Starsky and Hutch have, even though they still had cop chases and stuff like that. It's not nowhere near as cheesy as something like Starsky and Hutch. It's more serious, trying to be more realistic, more of a drama, and it's really good at what it was trying to do. I'm not interested in what it's trying to do. I just never been into police procedurals, so I found it kind of boring. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I watched the first episode, which I think is kind of a mistake afterwards, because I'd never seen the show before. I never read the book, but I saw the 2005 movie, or 2007, or whenever the fucking came out, and pretty much the whole storyline of this first episode was the first part of the movie. So I knew like everything that was happening. It was just with a much lower budget and bad special effects and 80s, special effects and stuff. But it seemed more British, which seemed to fit more at home. And I just never been a huge fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I have no interest whatsoever in ever reading the books. People say, oh, it's really funny. I'm not really into the kind of humor that has this dry British humor. I mean, it's okay, so I'll watch a movie about it or maybe a show, but I'm just not, and I don't know if I'm be motivated enough to watch the whole show even. It's just, I don't like the fact that all the aliens are like snobbish hipsters or like think they're so much better than human beings. That kind of annoys me, but anyway, like a bunch of hipster aliens. So... Music, Damaged by Black Flag, did not care for this. I am aware of Black Flag. I've heard their name. I never really listened to their music before. I know that Henry Rollins, actually I just learned that kind of recently. The past couple of years that Henry Rollins was the front man for it. And of course I'm familiar with Henry Rollins from the Henry Rollins Band in the 90s, which I like slightly better. But this seemed, just like basic yell, punk, and not any sort of music to it, so it wasn't really my thing. Fire of Love by the Gun Club. I listened to it right after Black Flag, so I think it was a slight improvement over the Black Flag, but it's still was kind of just generic punk to me. I mean, a little bit more interesting, but I wouldn't listen to this band again either. Talk 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 by the Psychedelic Furs. I'm only familiar with the Psychedelic Furs because the Smashing Pumpkins covered some of their songs, and I thought it would be better than this, quite frankly. Now, I had recognized a couple songs like The Pretty in Pink, which I looked it up. Apparently, the movie in the 80s was based off of this song. The title was, anyway. But it's okay, not really my thing. It felt kind of New Age-ish, Cure-ish kind of thing. It wasn't as good as I thought it might be. Maybe I heard some Psychedelic Furs songs from the 70s that I liked better. Maybe that was it. I don't know. So, Bad Reputation by Joan Jett. So this is... of course, I'm very familiar with that song, but the rest of the album, she did a lot of covers, and it made me realize that pretty much all of her hits are covers. I Love Rock and Roll, Bad Reputation, the Oh Yeah song she has on here, Do You Want to Touch Me? Yeah, that's what it's called. All covers. Like, I think I Hate Myself for Loving You is the only one that's not a cover. It's like, it's just all covers. And yeah, it was all right. I was getting into Joan Jett recently because of the Runaways, but I think this is definitely a step down from the Runaways. This is before she got the Black Hearts involved, and originally it was just called Self-Titled and nobody would release it, so that was an interesting backstory, but the album itself was kind of okay. And so that was a very mediocre day of 1981. Alright, so day 8, 1982, the year that Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan came out. The movies I watched was Porky's. TV shows I watched was Cheers, Cagney and Lacey, Remington Steele, Inspector Gadget. Music I listened to, Back from Samoa by Angry Samoans. The Blurred Crusade by The Church, Chronic Town by R.E.M., Human Conflict No. 5 by 10,000 Maniacs, and Time and Tide by Split Ends. So starting with the movie Porky's, this is the movie I think when conservatives say that comedy used to be good and it's not good anymore. This is the kind of movie they're talking about. A movie that is just shit, it's just unfunny, and it portrays a bunch of assholes. And the takeaways, that the messages that I really got that this movie was trying to give is, first, if you sexually harass and flash women and be peeping toms, they'll be really into you. And second, if it's not okay to be racist towards Jewish people, but it is okay to be racist towards black people. And the third message I think this movie is trying to say is it's okay to destroy property. You can destroy someone's bar, for example, while people are still in it. as long as you have corrupt cops on your side, you can get away with everything, and that's fine. So those are the messages I got from this movie. I was actively unfunny and had a whole bunch of assholes who were like frat boy types, who people I don't find interesting, would never want to be around, who I'd avoid at all costs. And so I never saw this movie when I was a kid. This is the first time ever watching it. I've heard of it. I heard it referenced, so I was curious about it, so I went out of my way to watch it. But yeah, I kind of regret doing it. It's the first movie I've done for this video which I actively wanted to turn off. I had to force myself to watch. It was boring. It was not funny. It was offensive. It was stupid. So that's Porky's. So TV shows. Cheers. I love this. This is by far the best sitcom I've watched so far for this video. I watched the first episode, which I've never seen before, but I used to watch Cheers all the time when I was younger. When I was really young, I avoided it because I didn't really get the bar thing, and I thought the theme song was boring. But when I got like a teenager, I started watching the reruns and watching it a lot more, and I really got into it. And I thought the later episodes were better than the earlier ones. So it's interesting that this first episode to me seemed way better than all the other sitcoms that I've watched so far. Like, it was funnier and it wasn't that cheesy. It didn't have that 80s cheese to it, at least not to the extent that the other ones I've watched are. So I can see why this show lasted so long and was so beloved. Next is Cagney and Lacey, and I've heard that title before, but I had no idea what it's about. It could have been about firefighters or lawyers for all I knew. But it was actually about two women detectives, and it dealt with sexism in the workplace, which several shows like Hill Street Blues and the next one I watched kind of deal with this. So maybe that's good, though, for the early 80s. They're finally starting to at least call attention to the sexism that existed in the workplace. But I didn't find this interesting. I found it really boring, and again, I kind of had to force myself to sit through it. I definitely wouldn't watch it again. It had the Muse from that Deep Space Nine episode. Fuck the Muse. What's her face? Meg something. Foster. Yeah, that's it. And it was weird seeing her, and I kept thinking of the Muse. Remington Steele. I know the title, because I know that it was Pierce Brosnan. That's where he got his start, and that's all I knew about it. I was like, people are like, oh, he's from Remington Steele. I'm like, I have no idea what the fuck that is. And apparently, it was an interesting concept, though, because apparently it was, again, a woman who's well-trained, who wanted to be a private detective, but no one would hire her because she's a woman, so she had to make up a fictional man named Remington Steele, and so they started hiring her. But then Pierce Brosnan showed up and pretended to be Remington Steele, and so he stuck around and was being like his figurehead, but he still lets her do all the work. And it was kind of interesting. They had it. I like Pierce Brosnan in this. I can see why this propelled him to popularity. He was really good in it. The episode I watched was kind of dumb, though, but maybe they're better episodes. I thought the concept of the show was good. Inspector Gadget I used to watch all the time when I was a little kid. I don't remember anything that much about it. I do remember certain things, like the fact that, and some things were coming back to me, that every episode was exactly the same, pretty much. That it had like the boss, whatever, give him a mission. It was like, this message will self-destruct, and Inspector Gadget always like throws it back on him and he explodes there, really making fun of that Mission Impossible thing, which I actually kind of like. But then the main episode's always about like Inspector Gadget being an idiot and kind of fucking everything up, but his niece is actually doing things behind the scene and actually helps him succeed all the time, but doesn't get any credit. The particular episode I watched, they went to India, and I was like, yeah, there's no way that this is not going to be offensive in some way. I mean, it wasn't too terrible, but a lot of stereotyping going on in that episode. But it's a cartoon from the 80s. What do you want? Music, Back from Samoa by Angry Samoans. I wanted to listen to it because I thought, hey, a punk band from Samoa, that sounds cool. they're not actually from Samoa. They're not actually Samoans. Apparently, they just use that name because they think it's cool, and it's just generic punk. And they have a couple of songs which I feel like there's one song I feel like is homophobic, and some other songs I feel like they're like offensive, but he's like shouting so fast that I can't tell. But whatever. Regardless of that, I just didn't like it. Didn't care for it. The Blurred Crusade by the Church. I heard of the Church. I only know him from that one song that was in Donnie Darko, the Under the Something Sky. Apparently that's the poppy song everyone knows, but yeah, I'm sorry, that's the only song I like of theirs. I didn't never heard of them until I watched Donnie Darko. I heard the name before, but I never heard any of their music, and to me they just sound like a generic sort of deep voice, new age British band, and Cure type thing, and I'm just not into it. Chronic Town by R.E.M. Early R.E.M., kind of what I expected from early R.E.M. Interesting comparing it to other stuff from came out in the early 80s. And I know that Radio Free Europe song, which technically isn't on the EP, but because it came out a year before, but it was around the same time. But yeah, so it was fine. Human Conflict number 5 by 10,000 Maniacs. I didn't know 10,000 Maniacs were around for that long. But I was never really into them, to be honest. And of course, I first heard of them in the early 90s. I like bands like the Cranberries better. So this album was kind of like what I would expect from early 10,000 Maniacs. It was fine. Time and Tide by Split Enz. Now, Split Enz is a very popular New Zealand band. I first heard of them when I lived in New Zealand, and they were huge, and they played everywhere. They were like classic. It has that one guy whose name I can't remember, who was also in Crowded House, and Crowded House, another huge New Zealand band, although that band is argued over whether it's New Zealand or Australian. I don't think it particularly matters. But Split Enz is strictly, definitely New Zealand. That's not debated. But it was it has a couple songs I recognize, like When I Was a Young Boy. I was like, oh, I didn't know that was them. But yeah, so I enjoyed it. It was a nice little, I liked those couple songs, and it was a nice little early 80s, like sort of, I don't know what to call British pop, whatever, but it's not British, it's New Zealand, but it has that sound to it. But yeah, it's that kind of thing, which is decent. So anyway, that is 1982 for me. Alright, so day 9, 1983, the year Return of the Jedi came out. The movie I watched was Valley Girl, TV shows Fraggle Rock, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Dynasty, Simon and Simon. Music I listened to, Stuck Us Over Disneyland by the Dixies, Power, Corruption, Lies by New Order, The Mating Sounds of South American Frogs by Peter and the Test Tube Babies, Confusion is Sex by Sonic Youth. So, starting with the movie Valley Girl, I'll be honest, I never ever heard of this movie before, not even the slightest, but it seems to be a fairly well-known movie. Nicolas Cage is in it, and apparently this is his first starring role, other than apparently slight appearances in 2 other movies, including Fast Time at Ridgemont High. Yeah, it was weird seeing Nicolas Cage. I looked up, and apparently he was 19 years old when he filmed this. I assumed he was in his 20s, and it just had him playing a teenager. Anyway, so this was your classic high school teenage 80s drama. As I said, I'm surprised I never heard of it because I saw all the John Hughes movies, although John Hughes would come later, 85 through 89. So maybe that time period is more what I'm used to. Maybe this slipped by me because it was too early. But yeah, they used to usually show all those in cable all the time, and I've never seen or even heard of this one. apparently there was a musical remake of this movie that came out in 2020. I never heard of that either, but I might have to check that out now out of curiosity. I saw the trailer for it and it looked like fake 80s, like what people nowadays think the 80s were like. But no, and I heard it sucked, but I'm still out of curiosity. Might have to check it out. And it was your typical sort of, felt like a John Hughes movie type thing. I actually really liked it, especially after watching Porky's. This is a good palate cleanse. It was actually, likable characters, likable situations, very, it's a typical, forbidden romance thing. It's funny because they're obviously doing a Romeo and Juliet theme, and they go to see Romeo and Juliet in big letters is making obvious. I like that the girl has like hippie parents who are like carefree, and it's not like, oh, don't see that man, he's bad trouble, because that would be cliche. It's funny that this is 83, yet they seem to be avoiding a lot of cliches. However, halfway through the movie, I'm like, there's no like big romantic comedy threat. Like, there's usually a thing where they break up or something and they're sad, and there has to be this huge thing at the end where the guy wins back the girl. But fair enough, it did oblige me with that. It did do that, and the way it did execute it seemed really clunky, and it was definitely just there for being there. So that made me think less of the movie, but otherwise, I just thought it was interesting characters, and the whole gimmick is Nicolas Cage is this punk rock from the city, and the girl he's dating is this from the suburbs, from the valley, and they're from two different worlds, and I don't know, it did seem like they kind of pushed that theme a bit too hard, and it didn't really seem natural. But as I said, I like the characters, everything like that. The big, preppy ex-boyfriend bad guy was played by the dude who plays Pickett in Lost, and I did not recognize him at first until I read his name in the credits. I was like, holy shit, he looks so much younger. But anyway, TV shows I watch. Fraggle Rock, I definitely used to watch this a lot as a kid, and I don't remember it at all. I just remember that I love it, and it's hard for me to get through. I don't like musical kid stuff, and it's obviously geared toward a really young age. But so it was a bit goofy, but it was okay. It was a fun little watch. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, another show I definitely watched a lot as a kid. I remember loving it and going, oh, I have the power! I don't remember it being this cheesy. And now I see Skeletor, I think of those Skeletor memes where he's like, remember! And gives some weird fun fact. That's all. I never watched that newer Kevin Smith. I'm kind of interested to do it, but yeah, it's what I would expect from a He-Man cartoon. Ha ha ha, da 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 da. It's like really cheesy, really cheesy. Anyway, Dynasty was so boring. The whole time I was watching, I was thinking, hey, it's Edith Keeler. Like, I know Joan Collins is famous for this show, but she was like Edith Keeler. Didn't even look that much older than she did when she played Edith Keeler. But anyway, it was so melodramatic. I know it was a soap opera, but it was so soap opera. It was so over the top melodrama and so cheesy and so like all of those soap opera cliches, like the long guy you thought was dead who's not actually dead, and he changed his face, and I don't know. I really didn't like that one. Simon and Simon, I remember when I was a kid, this would always come on after stuff, usually after football, I think, or after other things, like stay tuned for Simon and Simon, and I'd always change the channel when it came on, so I had no idea. None whatsoever. I always heard this name, Simon & Simon, but I never watched it. It could have been about lawyers for all I knew, but it was about... In fact, I thought it was about lawyers. But no, it's about two brothers who run a private detective agency. And in the episode I watched, they were being couriers or something with diamonds, and they got robbed or whatever. And I actually kind of liked it. It was, typical sort of PI thing, but it was. I don't think I'd want to watch it again, but it wasn't unpleasant to watch. Music I listened to: "Stuck Us Over Disneyland" by the Dixies. Didn't really care for the Dixies. They sounded like, they were punk, but not like the raw punk that I've been listening to. They almost sounded like popish, like almost like a precursor to Green Day. In fact, I could have, believed this came out in the 90s, although it wouldn't be a band I particularly cared for. Power, Corruption, Lies by New Order. I was surprised that I didn't like this album as much. New Order I first heard of, and you guessed it, the 90s, although they had that one song that came out in the late 80s that I did hear of, but I didn't know the name New Order until the 90s, and I used to have one of their greatest hits album, and had Blue Monday, which I fucking love, and I really love that song. I've been into Blue Monday recently, especially I watched the live version, so that was on, it was on the version of this album that I listened to, and it's the only song I really, really liked. The other ones were kind of just bland, sort of, 80s new wave stuff. I like the Blue Monday, not just for the how does it feel, but how it goes like in a long sort of tirade, like dance mix. I don't know, I was just really into it, and the rest of the songs were just okay. By doing my research, just found out that New Order was the band Joy Division, but Joy Division only had 2 albums, and their lead singer killed himself, and so they continued onwards and changed the band name to New Order. I had no idea. I'm sure huge fans of Joy Division are being, oh, how could you not know that? But I wasn't that familiar. In fact, I never heard of Joy Division until the early 2000s when I heard the Smashing Pumpkins cover one of their songs. And that's when I first heard of Joy Division. I did know that song from Donnie Darko, which again I watched in the early 2000s. But yeah, other than that, I hadn't heard of Joy Division, heard of New Order. Mating Sounds of South American Frogs by Peter and the Test Tube Babies. This sounded, I didn't care for this that much. This is punk again, but it actually had a hint of heavy metal. Almost sounded a little bit like a hair band, a little bit. Maybe a little bit like the heavy metal sort of Megadeth, Metallica feel to it, but also definitely punkish. It had the typical punk vocals. But didn't really care for that. Confusion is Sex by Sonic Youth. Of course, knew Sonic Youth from the early 90s, but I never was into them, really. I only knew a song or two. And I heard a couple of their songs that would just seem like screeching and offbeat and like they're playing badly. And that seemed to be this whole album. And I know people who are into Sonic Youth will tell me I don't get it. I mean, it's art because of, but to me it just sounds like they're purposely trying to make it themselves sound terrible. Like it's screeching and bad noise, and I don't get it. So I didn't listen to the whole thing. I was like, what is this even? I never got, to be honest, why people liked Sonic Youth. I was never really into them. I didn't know they were around the early 80s, so I thought it'd be cool to listen to it, but didn't really care for it. So anyway, that is 1983. So day 10, 1984. So this is the final year that I've covered for this video. I couldn't go any further in this because I'm getting to the part of stuff I've seen before, and I know, in fact, it was harder for me to pick out movies from these later years because I'd seen so many of them. So the movie I watched was Repo Man. TV shows was Miami Vice, Who's the Boss, Dragon Slayer, Transformers. Music I listened to Ocean Rain by Echo and the Bunnymen, Meat Puppets 2 by the Meat Puppets, From Here to Eternity by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Psychic Powerless by the Butthole Surfers, and Red Hot Chili Peppers' self-titled album. So starting with Repo Man, I looked up movies to see which was the most punk rock, and a couple lists I saw this was on it. On every list I saw, and it was number 1 on a couple of lists. I had to check it out. I've heard of this movie before. I remember I used to see it in the sci-fi section at Blockbuster, but I never rented it. It just didn't seem like my speed. And it is fucking wild. It is crazy. To me, it seems like a precursor to like Doom Generation, where just crazy shit happens all the time. I was thinking it might be a movie like sort of a lot of these movies where it's like people go out on a one night adventure and all this crazy shit happens, like Superbad and Adventures in Babysitting, and a couple other random Men at Work, like a couple other random shit. But it wasn't really like that. It was much more confusing. I think it was more along the lines of Doom Generation. It's like, it starts out pretty straightforward. This punk rocker needs a job, and the guy's like, hey, steal this car, and he ends up being a repo man and making more money that way. But then it involves, like, there's a side plot with these aliens, this alien car that's like killing people if you look in the trunk, and it just doesn't really make any sense. And the ending's kind of wild. It loses me after a while. It was hard for me to follow the plot, but I still enjoyed it. I still liked it. The one thing I will say is definitely is punk rock. One of the complaints I had about Valley Girl from the previous day was the fact that Nicolas Cage's character was supposed to be all punk rockish, but when he went to a club and the girls he went with, like, oh, I hate this music, it was just typical 80s rock music, like pop radio music, and it seems like they were too scared to actually do actual punk, because it seems like that scene would have made way more sense if it was something like Black Flag or Angry Samoans playing, and they do have Black Flag in music in this movie. In fact, Emilio Estevez's character's one point is like saying random TV shows, and had I not listened to Black Flag, I wouldn't know what he's talking about, but now I know from listening to it the night before that it is actually Black Flag's song that he's singing, and Iggy Pop did the theme song for this movie, so yeah, it's very punkish. I enjoyed it. Crazy over the top. TV shows, Miami Vice, better than I thought it was. I purposely chose an episode that Maurice Hurley wrote because I wanted to see if it was very cheesy. It actually wasn't that cheesy. I was expecting the outrageous O'Connor to pop up, but instead Bruce Willis popped up. Bruce Willis was playing the main villain in there, and the villain was an asshole, and Bruce Willis, funny thing, does a really good job at being an asshole. How about that? And it was, so it was interesting seeing it, and it was all about this arms dealer, and the ending was kind of shocking, not what I expect. So I think this is when the cop shows started maybe improving, and wasn't nearly as cheesy as I thought it would be. Who's the Boss? I have watched this show when I was younger. I don't remember. In fact, I didn't even remember the premise. It was about, Tony Danza going into the suburbs to be a maid and work at some rich woman's house, and there's a will they won't they, particularly in the episode I watched. It was toying with the will they won't they thing, and I didn't care for it, but actually it's not the cheesiest sitcom I watched. It was much worse. It was moderately funny. It was tolerable. So Dragon's Lair, I remember the cartoon. There was an arcade game when I was a kid. It cost like a fortune, like $2 to play, and it lasted like 30 seconds. And it was really impossible because it was a really unique game because it looked like an actual Disney cartoon and not like the pixel things. But because of that, there wasn't much. So I never heard of the TV show, and I watched it, and it seemed like a typical sort of fantasy sort of TV show. It does seem like the quality in these cartoons are improving, though, over the years. Transformers, I did used to watch all the time when I was a little kid. I don't really remember much about it. I remember Laserbeak, Eject, and and I still hear that saying sometimes, and whatever, what do they call it? Autobots. He doesn't say assemble, that's Avengers. Whatever he says. I don't know. And it was pretty much just as I would expect. It's cheesy, it's big cars turning into aliens, and maybe not as chaotic as those stupid Michael Bay movies, but still not as big into those anymore. Music I listened to, Ocean Rain by Echo and the Bunnymen. I hadn't heard of Echo and the Bunnymen until the early 2000s. I probably heard a couple of their songs, I just didn't know the name of them. Donnie Darko's when I first heard him with The Killing Moon, and that song was on here. I like that song. The rest of the album, it was okay. It was decent. It's kind of what I would expect. Meat Puppets 2, I think I actually used to have this CD a long time ago, but I don't really remember it. I wanted to listen to it again because it has the 3 songs that Nirvana covered with them on Unplugged. And Oh Me, Plateau, and Lake of Fire, and yeah, so I like those songs in particular. The rest of it was kind of interesting. It was kind of the screeching punkish, but some of the had a country twang to it, which I don't particularly appreciate. Not a huge fan of country, but it was okay. From Here to Eternity, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. So I have heard of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds before. I've heard people talk about them, throw their name around. Other people go to their concerts, but I had no idea what their music was like. I thought it would be something like Lou Reed or like David Bowie or something along those lines. Not at all. It was probably, I don't know how to describe it. Probably equate it most to like Tom Waits or something like that, like the screeching sort of folk type, with a little punk edge to it. It was decent. It was fine. Maybe not my speed, but it was good. Psychic Powerless by the Butthole Surfers. So I have heard of the Butthole Surfers. I did know they were around for this long, so I wasn't surprised. And the album sounded just like I thought it would. Very, early punkish, proto Butthole Surfers were what they would be in the 90s, and yeah, so it's what I expected. It was decent. Red Hot Chili Peppers, in contrast, I had no idea that they were around in 84. I didn't know they were this old. The album was very funk-ish, probably more funk-like than their later stuff. So it was maybe I didn't like it as much as their later stuff, but it was still good. It was still interesting. It was interesting to me is that they had a song where they were like kind of rapping, and it sounded like 80s rap, and it made me realize that stuff like Run DMC doing Walk This Way didn't come out until after this. So this is even before that, mixing sort of rap and metal. Which is interesting. So anyway, that is it. That is 1984. Alright, so conclusion and I know this didn't give me a full comprehensive look at each year. I focused on things I hadn't seen before. TV shows is the closer I got to like pop culture. Movies, I get mostly stuck to weird, obscure stuff, maybe punk themed stuff. And music, definitely punk themed, new wave, kind of more of the stuff, the obscure-ish stuff, or maybe early stuff, the bands I knew in the alternative 90s, that sort of thing. So it wasn't like a comprehensive look, but I thought it was an interesting experience it still gave me a taste of the late 70s, early 80s, because I was either not alive or too young to remember it. So it was interesting. For the most part, it was mostly adult stuff, which I wouldn't be involved with at an early age. And so it was interesting to get a sort of feel for some of the culture and stuff. So movies that I particularly liked, Over the Edge. Let's see, Over the Edge, Valley Girl, and Repo Man. So 83 and 84 in particular, probably my favorite ones. I was surprised how much I like Valley Girl, because that's a typical like teen 80s romance, but I actually liked it better than some of this other stuff like Pretty in Pink and all the other John Hughes movies. Maybe not as good as Breakfast Club, so let's not get crazy, but still, I was surprised how much I enjoyed it. And Repo Man, yeah, it's crazy over the top shit, but that I like better than Jubilee. Jubilee was also crazy over the top punkish, but that seemed pretentious. That just seemed more chaotic and it wouldn't really have a plot, so I wasn't a fan of that. The worst movie was by far Porky's, easily. Stuff like Bad Timing, I was going to say Roadrunner again, Road Warrior, and Man Who Fell to Earth. That stuff was, and Shadow of Chikira, that stuff was all fine. That was okay. Probably Road Warriors probably had the best of those four I just mentioned. Boring as a Dog, the ending ruined it to me. It was too disturbing. Like, I talked about how Bad Timing, everyone was saying, was so disturbing. I think Boring as a Dog was actually far more disturbing, personally. So, TV shows. There's some TV shows that I might watch again because I enjoyed Space 1999 is at the top of the list. I was actually curious to maybe watch more episodes of Bionic Woman, which, even though it's cheesy, it kind of caught my attention. I remember Soap, and I remember liking Soap. Let's see, maybe later episodes of Mork and Mindy but I wouldn't watch like a whole lot of Mork and Mindy, but just to get a bigger taste of what it was. I'm staying away from stuff like Battlestar Galactica. I'm sorry, that was very cheesy. And Fantasy Island and stuff like The Professionals or Charlie's Angels didn't really get my attention. And what else have we got here? Let's see. Sorry, just looking at the list here. You didn't care for Hill Street Blues or Cagney and Lacey. Definitely wouldn't watch this. I want to watch Cheers now. I am that probably Cheers gets the award for best sitcom of the ones out of the sitcoms that I watch. Remington Steele is okay too. I might not mind watching more of Remington Steele either. So, yeah, Dynasty definitely not. Simon & Simon, no way. Yeah, I mean, Simon & Simon wasn't terrible. I just wouldn't be interested in watching anymore. Maybe Miami Vice, but not that interested. So I think as far as drama, that's definitely Space 1999. Sitcom was Cheers. And cartoon, I would say Thundarr the Barbarian. That actually surprised me. It was definitely cartoon-ish, but it was definitely a bit interesting, an interesting premise. Now, when it comes to music, I've already been listening to Suicide. I'd never heard of this band before, and that really grabbed me. Maybe not the best. I like Devo. I've been checking out Devo a lot. I was familiar with their radio songs, but now started hearing the album. It makes me want to check out more of their stuff. Talking Heads I was already very familiar with, so maybe I shouldn't even put them on this list. But yeah, there was a lot of the Wipers as well. Definitely want to check out the Wipers, not just the songs that Nirvana covered, but yeah, the Wipers were very interesting. And there was a lot of like generic punk, but it was interesting going back from early 70s or mid 70s to mid 80s and listening to a lot of the punk music in that time, because a lot of it did sound to my ears like 90s ish. It's like I didn't realize, especially stuff like Susie and the Banshees, that wasn't really punk, but that sounded way more 90s than I thought. It came out in the 70s, and so I wasn't aware of all of this music because this wasn't in the mainstream. When I grew up in the 80s, I was listening to Michael Jackson and Madonna and mainstream 80s shit. Some Cure or Tears for Fears, so some of the new wave stuff, but not really. And so it was interesting going back and hearing all this earlier punk, and not all of it was to my liking. Like a lot of it was generic punk. You probably heard me say this is just another generic punk album with like a da 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 da, which isn't really my flavor. I like the sort of more nuanced grunge sounding things, but as I said, there was that we got that in some bands like Suicide and what is it? The Wipers, yes, the Wipers. So this is kind of an interesting experience. It was kind of spur of the moment thing. It wasn't part of my normal plans for my channel. I wanted to do this for me. And I was like, well, I might as well make a video about it. If I'm going to bother to go through and watch all these shows and movies and listen to all this music, I might as well do a video about it. So here it is. Hope you enjoyed it. My journey through 1975 through 1984. And if you ever find a time machine, let me know so I can go back and live in the early 80s, the late 70s. Maybe I wouldn't stay there because it was a bit of a problematic time. But it would definitely be interesting to experience it. And of course, like, this is just TV show, especially TV shows, very scripted and cheesy. It doesn't really give you a taste of what life is really like. Movies maybe a little bit more, but those are still scripted. But the music is more of a, again, I took out this one little slice of the genre of music that I sort of was interested in hearing more of. But anyway, so yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for sharing this journey with me. And be sure to check out my channel if you're into Star Trek, because I'm covering the shit out of Star Trek. I have so many Star Trek videos currently covering Deep Space Nine and Voyager. So yeah, and also do many other videos on many other shows. So yeah, be sure to check out my channel for many more stuff, and be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.